Kia ora te whānau, iho karaiti ko Andrew Dobbledale. Today we're looking at the Gospel for Sunday, the 7th of September 2025. It's Luke chapter 14, verses 25 through to 33. Now, large crowds were travelling with Jesus, and he turned and said to them, "Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even life itself, cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not first sit down and estimate the cost to see whether you have enough to complete it? Otherwise, when you've laid the foundation and are not able to finish, all will see and will begin to ridicule you, saying, 'This one began to build and was not able to finish.' Or what king, going out to wage war against another king, will not sit down first and consider whether he's able with 10,000 to oppose the one who comes with 20,000? If he cannot, then, while the other is still far away, he'll send a delegation and ask for terms of peace. So therefore, none of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions." Okay, that sounds like a really high bar, Jesus. You start off by inviting us to hate. Whoever comes to you, you say, and doesn't hate father and mother, wife and children, presumably husband, brothers and sisters, cannot be your disciple. Whew, that's hard. That's a high bar. All the scholars I've checked seem to regard this as hyperbole. It's a figure of speech. It could be more accurately translated, "does not esteem them less than me." Jesus is making a very serious point, and he wants his disciples, his hearers, his followers to get it. You've got to love them less. You've got to love me more. Wow. Wow, why would that be? Well, we'll get to that shortly. But as I say, it's a hard bar to get across. Hate your wife? And my mind immediately went to the Genesis story of Adam and Eve. Now, I just want to reflect briefly on the story. However you understand it, whether you regard it as being a literal account of events that happened or a mythical story, actually it doesn't matter at this point. What is important is the meaning. So we know the story. There's Adam in the garden, and he's given Eve as his companion. And there's this tree with fruit, which Adam is told very explicitly that he is not to eat. They are not to eat. This is forbidden. We know the telling of the story that Eve is tempted. She looks at the fruit. She takes it. She eats it. And she gives it to Adam, who also eats. Now, I'm going to do a thing which might be tricky for some of you, but I'm just going to read a few verses from how Paul in 1 Timothy 2 understands this event. And he frames it like this: "I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man. She must be silent." And now he gives his rationale. I'm not justifying his position, the way he extrapolates the story, but it's interesting to notice what he does. Verse 13, "For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not the one deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner." Now, I'm inviting you to let the implications sink in. If you haven't got it yet, I'm coming to it. I'm not justifying Paul's extrapolation. I'm wanting to point to something else. What do you think it might be? I'm not wanting to make a saint of Adam. I've never heard of Saint Adam anyway, or in any way exonerate him. We might argue that he was the one who heard the prohibition about eating the fruit firsthand. He heard it directly. Eve only got it secondhand. So there's a way that we could argue that he's no less culpable. In fact, he may be more so, and this is the bit I'm wanting to get to. Paul says that he was not deceived. Okay, so if that's true, he ate the fruit with full awareness of the consequences, unlike Eve. Perhaps he already knew what had happened. Perhaps he could already see that a change had taken place in Eve. Perhaps recognizing at some deep level that death was already upon her, even though it took many, many, many years to finally work itself out. And so here he is, knowing exactly what's happened. He's faced with a choice: to be with Eve and share her fate, or to be with the Lord and find himself alone again. At this point, we find that he couldn't love her less than he loved God. He loved her more. What might the history of the world have looked like if he loved God more? We'll never know. So here's the challenge. As I said, let's make no mistake, the bar that Jesus sets is very high. Why does he set the bar so high? Does he really not want us to love those who are closest to us? No, of course not. This runs counter to all that we find in the New Testament. But he's insisting that our commitment to him be primary. Why? Because he knows that it will enrich everything else in our lives. Our love for those about us will be deeper and richer. There will be a joy, an authenticity, a transparency in all our relationships. We won't love wife, husband, brother, sister, children less. We'll love them more. There will be no hiding, no pretending, but a wholeheartedness in all our relationships. You get that? Then he strikes at the heart of the challenge. Whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. What does he mean by this? He's already told us that we need to deny ourselves, pick up our cross on a daily basis, each and every day. He tells us that in Luke chapter 9. So what does he mean? Our minds immediately go to the burdens we feel that we must bear, whether an affliction, a relationship difficulty, misfortune. We say, oh, it's just a cross I have to bear. But what if he's not meaning anything like that? That when we say that that's what it means, we've trivialized his intent. What does it mean then for him, for Jesus? Literally. What did he have to do? Well, he literally carried the crossbeam to his death. The cross was the instrument of his death, of his dying. So perhaps then we're being invited every day to come to terms with and embrace our own death. Every day to make friends with the reality that we're going to die. And it could be today. Every day to recognize that my very life is in the hands of Jesus. Why would he say this? Well, I want to suggest it's because he knows that the fear of death is the main distorting factor in our lives. And it translates in all sorts of fears. The one who fears, he says in 1 John, is not made perfect in love. Fear has a significant distorting effect upon everything within us. Around the turn of the century, I read most of the books written by Irvin Yalom. Irvin Yalom was for many years professor of psychiatry at Stanford University. A very interesting man. One of his key tomes was a book called Existential Psychotherapy. This book was published in 1985. It was the most expensive book I have ever bought. And in it, he deals with 4 issues that he believed that every human being needs to come to terms with in order to be whole. The last 3 were existential aloneness, that we come into the world alone and we ultimately leave it alone. We're ultimately alone. The second one was the fear of freedom. Or maybe this is the third. The fear of freedom. That we say we want to be free, but we don't really. We like to have rules, we like to have guardrails, we like to have a sense of security, which all these things provide us. And the final thing is the question of meaning. Who am I? Why am I here? And how destructive, actually, asking ourselves honestly that question, I want to suggest outside of God, can be. Now, the first half of the book, whole half of the book, is dedicated, is taken up by the first issue, which is the fear of death. And for him, this is the biggie. He would suggest, I want to suggest that the fear of death is the root of all anxiety disorders and most mental illness. And that the fear of death is so pervasive that we spend most of our lives, most of our energy, actually avoiding it, avoiding facing it. It drives our ambition, it drives our work, it drives our pursuit of distraction and leisure activities. Now, it may be that you're going to need serious time to process this and to be honest with yourself, and you're not going to believe me. You're likely to be with most people who say, I'm not afraid of death. It's the process that concerns me a little bit and I'm not looking forward to. I want to ask you to imagine if we could live without fear. If when faced with a challenge, the worst that could happen to us is that we die, and that we're absolutely okay with that. That we've concluded that there are worse things than death. That a life not fully lived is worse than death. That a life lived in the grip of cowardice and fear and self-reproach and recrimination and guilt and shame is worse than death. That a life lived without love, either wholeheartedly giving or receiving it, even if it's painful, is worse than death. And Jesus invites us to follow him daily in living fully. Jesus knows that if we commit ourselves to fully being his followers, trusting him in every situation, there will be no room for the crippling effects of fear. A fear that keeps us less, keeps us small, keeps us from being all that we could be. Take up your cross daily, he says. Take it up. Embrace your death so that you can live fully and follow Jesus every day. Our lectionary text concludes with these words. So therefore, None of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions. What? What's this? Yeah, there's more. The text is ultimately about surrendering our attachments. And our stuff can be a problem. I've spoken on this before. Jesus is actually sounding very Buddhist at the moment. Yet there's still this pervading sense that Jesus wants us to be free. The problem with our possessions is not that we have them, but we need to be sure that they don't have us. They don't own us. They don't possess us. As I said, he's calling us to be free, free of attachments. That when our commitment is to loving and following him, everything else falls into its right place. Now, we should be done there, shouldn't we? Because we've reached the end of the lectionary text. But what's interesting is that our text misses the two concluding verses of this whole section. It's as if they're about something else, and I suspect that the people who devised the lectionary concluded that they were. It says this, verses 34 and 35 of chapter 14. Salt is good, but if salt loses its flavour, how can it be restored? It's of no value for the soil or the manure pile. It's to be thrown out. The one who has ears, let him hear. The one who has salt is good, but if salt loses its flavour, how can its flavour be restored? It's of no value for the soil or for the manure pile. It's to be thrown out. The one who has ears to hear had better listen. Why does he say this? Why does he tack this on? How does it fit? Well, it's simple really. I want to suggest that salt adds flavour. It's a preservative. It gives zing and a bit of a sting. And isn't what this whole thing is about? Jesus doesn't want our lives to be flat, to be stale, to be colourless and tasteless. We're being invited to take up our cross daily, embracing our death daily, taking inventory that our possessions don't possess us, trusting Jesus for the day ahead. And when we do that, it becomes the ultimate zingy, flavour-giving zest in our lives. Amen. God bless you.